Lapping pivot holes. Is it necessary? Let's talk about it. All right, so the first thing that comes to mind if we're going to talk about lapping pivot holes is issues you can have with the fit of the blade to the actual pivot barrel. And I see it as there's three different things that can go wrong. I've got another extra blade blank here. So the first thing is if your pivot hole is not absolutely perpendicular to your blade. Okay, so if, for example, let's say this little rod is your pivot barrel, exaggerated. If it is off at an angle this way or this way, anything that isn't absolutely perpendicular to the length of the blade, it's going to cause an issue with the tip being centered, and it's going to cause an issue possibly with the action of the blade. All right. So the second potential problem you could have between the pivot hole and the pivot barrel itself is the spacing between the blade and the liners. So basically what you need is thickness of your washers. In this case I'm using phosphor bronze washers. It could be bearings, it doesn't matter. Plus the blade. Basically the washers plus the blade needs to equal the thickness of your backspacer or your standoffs. If the thickness is overall too thick, then you're going to have binding between the blade and the liners. And if it's too thin, basically your blade or your shims are too thin and it doesn't make up enough room to fill this space, then you're going to have slop. And that slop will show with your blade tip not being centered, and it'll also show possibly affecting your lockup, because you'll have movement where the blade can actually move back and forth on the barrel. Okay. So the last issue that I see, and this is the one we're going to talk about in terms of lapping, is if your fit between your pivot hole and your pivot barrel is too loose or too tight. Okay? If it's too tight, you're not going to be able to get your pivot barrel in anyway. And if it's too loose, it's going to create slop, which is going to result, again, in your blade not being centered inside the knife. So, and also it can affect your lockup, and it can affect other things. What we have here is a 3/16 inch lap. This, and I'm using the 3/16 because it's a little larger, a little easier to see on camera. But it's basically three pieces. You have a shaft here that this end will mount in the drill press or the mill. You have this brass lap, and then you have a little expander screw. And the thing goes together pretty easy. It just screws together. And there is no backwards because the lap itself is threaded the same on both ends. And then you put the expander screw in the bottom. The whole thing will sit in your drill press like this. And all you do is tighten. There's a little wrench flat on the bottom of this, and you just tighten it, and that opens up the lap to create the friction you need to open up your hole. So we'll demonstrate this on the drill press and see how I do my lapping. Alright, so the first thing I do is I go ahead and ream with a 1/2 thou undersize reamer. So this is 0.1245. This is the lapping compound that I use. I also got this from McMaster Car. Here's the whole label. And it is 800 grit diamond lapping compound. The way I use this is I just put a little smear on the lap. maybe where you can see it. Okay, next thing I do is I just bring the lap down, and this thing is all the way loose right now, so it should drop right down into the hole without any problem. Okay, now I'm ready to start lapping, and I have a very small little crescent wrench that I use, and I'll show you how I tighten this as we go. So I'll start it up, and I'll run the lap down through. And I don't feel any friction yet, so I will give this an 1/8 of a turn. Run it through again. Now I'm still not feeling any friction, so we're not quite tight enough yet. So I will find the flat, tighten this. I'll go a full quarter, just because I know I've got a little ways to go. Alright, now I'm just starting to feel just the slightest amount of friction as I go down through there. So at this point, I'm going to start checking the hole against the barrel that I want it to fit. This is about as awkward an angle as I could try to do this. Right now, the pivot barrel just barely catches on the edge, but it is not willing to drop in yet. Okay, so we're going to open it up a little bit more. So one of the things I do is I make sure I wipe off the surface of everything. That way I don't have anything sitting at an angle. I'll put a little bit more lapping compound on, and then I will tighten the lap again. About 1/8 of a turn. Okay, so at this point, the lap fits into the hole, but it's just a little too snug. I need just a little bit looser. So I'm going to run it one more time. I'll wipe everything off. Make sure it's sitting nice and flat. Put just a little bit more lapping compound on it. I will tighten it. I'm not even going to go 1/8 of a turn. I'm going to go half that. Run it. All right. And then I'm going to clean it up again. I want to get all that lapping compound out of there. I just want to make sure that I'm not setting myself up for premature failure of the knife by having diamond dust down inside here. So I wipe the barrel off, make sure I don't have any lapping compound on it, and then I'll slip this in. And now we got a nice slip fit with no side to side wobble. All right, but it fits pretty good. You can see it'll pivot on that. And that is the fit that I would be happy with for a knife. Alright, so that's my lapping procedure. It's pretty straightforward. It's really easy to do. You can do it on a drill press. You can't do any of this kind of work on a drill press unless it's accurately trimmed in. And I'm going to do a video on that coming up pretty soon. So we'll talk about how to make sure that your drill press is cutting straight. So the one last thing I want to say is I'm not saying that lapping your pivot is the only standard out there, okay? I arrived at this over the course of time, and a lot of my knives didn't have the pivots lapped. They're still great knives, all right? But as I was looking to refine my knives and get better at every aspect of knife making, lapping the pivot became something that became important to me. And I have seen a marked improvement in my blade tip centering on my knives because I started lapping the pivot holes. And really that's how I arrived at lapping. My blades did not always come out perfectly centered. And it was a gamble, you know, it was always a toss of the dice. Will it be centered when I'm done or will it not? And since I started lapping my pivot holes, I don't even worry about whether the blade's going to be centered. So as long as I grind straight, I know that blade's going to be centered. All right, so if you have any questions about anything, feel free to ask in the comment section. I will try to answer all questions to the best of my ability. If you liked this discussion, please give me a thumbs up. I've got a video coming up on how I work with W2. It's not going to cover hormones, but it is going to talk about normalizing, it's going to talk about thermal cycling, quenching, and tempering. Maybe later on we'll get into how I do hormones also. I've also got a video coming up on how to tram your drill press to make sure that you're punching straight holes in not only your pivots on your blades, but everything, bolsters, scale material, everything. Making sure that your drill press is properly trammed is probably one of the most important things in your knife shop. Also got a video coming up on how I design knives in Adobe Illustrator. So if you want to catch those and other new topics, hit that subscribe button. Again, thanks for watching. Ranger Made Knives out.